The film's intro features a view of a quiet house. Inside, however, a woman is fighting for her life, struggling to get away from an unseen entity that appears to be chasing her. We then move on to the next scene, which shows a man named Benny, who is sitting on a ledge by the beach in the middle of the night. He is having 2 beers to help him relax and enjoy his night by himself. On the next day, Benny announces to a friend of his that he plans to go biking through Crow Valley, which is a remote valley located a few hours from the city. He claims that he wants to take his time to clear his head and get away from the crowd. A few hours later, he takes off with a car and parks in front of a general store, enters the store to buy a drink. We can see that there's also a woman, who appears in the beginning of the film inside the store. Benny then proceeds to take out the bicycle he rented and gear up. At the same time, the woman is taking a break in front of the general store, before continuing on her journey. After that, Benny gets on his rental bike and heads for Crow Valley, leaving his car parked in front of the store. However, he eventually comes to a halt when he realizes that the front wheel of his bicycle has gone flat. He steps down to assess the situation, but suddenly, a fast-moving car hits him and knocks him out. It turns out that the woman in the store is the one who hit him, and before her actions are discovered by anyone, she quickly takes the unconscious Benny into her car, and drives away. Not long after, she comes across a quiet cabin and makes a stop there. She begins walking around the premises, until she finds her way in. After making sure that the villa is indeed empty, she is now ready to execute her plan. Benny then wakes up inside the cabin with an injured arm, bewildered and unsure what had happened to him. The woman greets him, and upon realizing that Benny has slight amnesia, instead of telling him the truth about what happened, she decides to make up a story instead. She tells him that she found him unconscious by the side of the road, and decided to pick him up. She also tells him that they're now inside her uncle's cabin, and manages to make Benny to believe her. Benny then asks her to call an ambulance because his injured arm needs medical attention. But she rejects this idea by saying that there is no service in Crow Valley. Benny relents, and asks for her help realigning the bones in his arm instead. Although unsure because of her lack of experience, the woman agrees and the two get to work. After conducting the fracture reduction, she appears shaken. She retreats to the kitchen and gets a drink, right when she begins hearing an ominous whisper. We are then taken to a flashback scene of the woman and her mother, in which she lashes out at her because her mother tells her that she folds her clothes improperly.
Being so dramatic.
How about you just stop ruining my life?
In fact, she and her mother didn't get along well, and always got into fights. When she tries peeking through the blinds to see outside the window, she sees a scary-looking figure standing on her lawn, and vanishes in a blink of an eye. Now we return to present time, where Benny walks up to the woman in the kitchen, and the two begin getting acquainted with one another. It is at this point that the woman introduces herself as Greta. Benny expresses that he feels guilty for the trouble he's caused her, but she assures him that she's happy to help. As Greta serves him supper, Benny tells her that he'd like to return home soon, but she discourages him by saying that she's worried about his condition. She tells him that she doesn't have her car with her, and that she only managed to get him to the cabin by hitching a ride. At this point, Benny begins to suspect that something's off, questioning the plausibility of Greta's story. As we move to Greta's past again, we discover that she has actually suffered from depression in the past, and her past reveal that she used to throw away her mental health medication. Moreover, she has the feeling that something is always following her. Until at some point her mother found medication Greta had thrown away, which led to an argument as Greta refused to admit she'd done so. Later that night, Greta is alone in her room, where she appears overwhelmed by the ominous whispers that fill her head. It turns out that the ominous whispers tells her to kill Benny. Fortunately, she snaps out of it and backs away. She then returns to her room and screams into her pillow, heavily frustrated by the whispers she keeps hearing. The next morning, Benny wakes up and gets outside, intending to look for help. He trudges through the empty road hoping he'd come across someone who could help him. Benny stops by a tree to rest, and accidentally happens upon what he suspects to be a covered-up car. Fascinated, he walks up to it, and he is right when he discovers it's a car. He then shows his discovery to Greta, but Greta acts as if she is unaware of the car's presence. It is clear now that David has become even more suspicious that she's been lying to him, and he is convinced that the car is hers. The two argue, and Greta walks off before David gets to confirm his suspicion. Determined to unravel the truth, David searches for a car key around the cabin. After spending some time going through Greta's things, he takes off a drawer, and there it is. He finds the car key, proving that his suspicion all this time is not unwarranted. Meanwhile, Greta's mind appears to be messed up right when she sees Benny return to the car. She gets the feeling she'll be in trouble, so she returns to the cabin to find her room in complete disarray. She realizes that David has indeed found her car key and took it. At the same time, David is outside by the car and is about to get away from the premises. Greta menacingly comes up to him with a baseball bat, and yells at him to step away from the car. Of course, David is reluctant and tells her to throw the bat away. However, Greta proceeds to swing the bat, until she hits him and knocks him unconscious again. Greta drags him back inside the cabin, where she lays a tarp on the kitchen floor, and tapes David to a chair. When David wakes up, he doesn't expect that Greta could act this way. He begs to be released, and offers to pay whatever amount she wants. But that isn't what Greta wants. Instead, she grabs hammer and threatens Benny, forcing him to confess his real name.
What's your real name?
Scared of what she might do, he finally tells her his real name. It is David Stonehouse. David isn't off the hook though, for right after hearing the name, Greta begins hearing the whispers again.
Cup of tea?
She then bashes the hammer against his hand, crushing it. As a result, David screams in pain, and Greta staggers back as soon as the whispers stop. This woman appears to be guilty, and that she is in complete disbelief about what she has just done. She then shows him an old picture of her and her sister, Hannah. It is at this point that David realizes Greta's real name is Olivia. She is actually Hannah's sister, and Hannah was killed by him in a hit-and-run accident a few years ago. David is shaken by this revelation, while Olivia proceeds to blame him for taking off and leaving her sister for dead, instead of being responsible by trying to save her. David, however, claims that he checked Hannah's pulse and was fairly certain that she was already dead that time. He tries to apologize, but it falls on deaf ears because Olivia asserts he was drunk that night, and she was still unable to cope with her grief. All of a sudden, Olivia starts hearing the whispers again.
What are you screaming at? There's nothing there.
And this time, she begins to lose it. She starts blaming him for everything that went wrong in her life, and is ready to bash his head with the hammer. Right when they hear the sound of a truck entering the driveway. As it turns out, it is the actual owner of the cabin. Olivia walks out and greets him, pretending to be an injured traveler who got lost, and stayed in the man's cabin for a while. Olivia then asks the owner for a ride, because she really wants to get away from there. However, after seeing the blood on her shirt, the man becomes even more curious and wants to look into his cabin first.
What the fuck's going on here?
Once he walks through the door, Olivia picks up the baseball bat and hits him, smashing his skull and knocking him to the floor. And then all of a sudden, she snaps out of it, and, yet again, seems to be in complete disbelief of what she had just done. David tells her help the man right away, so she rushes to help him after seeing a pool of blood forming around his head.
2 fingers next to his Adam's apple.
You're just gonna run.
Let me go, please. I won't run. Let me go. Let me fucking go.
I don't feel anything.
It is too late now because the man is dead. Olivia is now shaken and leaves David alone, crying while looking at her sister's photo. Now alone in the room, David sees an opportunity to escape. After he frees himself, he takes the car key and heads straight to the car. Not long after, Olivia returns to the kitchen to find David gone. Unfortunately, he keeps trying to start the car's engine, but it just won't start. Meanwhile, he could see Olivia making a run towards him. With no other option, David steps out of the car and makes a run for the woods. He hides under a fallen tree trunk, and hopes that Olivia won't find him. Luck is on his side, for Olivia passes him without discovering his whereabouts. But then, David is reminded of the unfortunate incident that took place a few years ago, wherein he drunkenly hit a woman riding a bicycle with his car, and took off after finding that she was unconscious. David then steps out of his hiding spot after making sure that the coast is clear, and heads back to the cabin, now planning to take the dead guy's truck to escape instead. Before he knows it, Olivia is standing in the room, holding the cabin owner's car keys. As a result, David has no other choice but to face her, and the two start brawling on the floor. In the end, Olive gets stabbed by her own knife. David hurriedly takes the car keys and gets the truck running. However, he pauses before he goes, realizing that he doesn't want to repeat the same mistake twice. David then gets back inside the cabin. He drags the heavily injured Olivia into the backseat of the truck. On their drive back, Olivia regains consciousness, and pulls out the knife lodged in her gut, prompting David to stop the car to help her stop the bleeding. But alas, Olivia has lost too much blood, and there is only so much David could do to help her. She takes one last breath and dies, having failed to seek revenge on David. David is remorseful and disappointed in himself. Before the film ends, he sits outside his truck in his sorrow, and finally sees the ghost that had haunted Olivia all this time, which might be the ghost of her sister, Hannah.